Welcome to the show. This week we have Bri. Bri, I'm so excited to have you with us. Tell us a
Me
little bit about yourself.
too. Yeah, so I am a social worker and I have my own practice called Therapy with Bree. And I am also studying to be a poetry therapist. So that is what lights me up the most because poetry is my passion and I just love sharing it with people and helping people through literature and writing.
Yeah. So I'm very curious because I know we've talked a little bit about poetry therapy before in other conversations, but before you shared it with me, it was something I had never heard about or never even considered that could be an option. So like, what does poetry therapy look like?
Yeah, because usually you hear more about art therapy, music therapy. So I feel like this is kind of a hidden gem still. Like not everyone knows about it, but it can look different, but a lot of times how it looks in sessions with me is I bring a poem that has something to do with what my client is going through, whether it's grief or trauma or depression, anxiety. And then we read over the poem and talk about it. And usually there's something that they can connect to in the poem and something that maybe gives them a new perspective or a new insight or just like, wow, I'm not alone in this, right? And then usually what we'll do is a writing exercise. So I usually like to do some juicy journaling prompts, and sometimes people prefer an open-ended question, or sometimes people like to do a fill in the blank of their own poem. It really just depends, but it's also really nice to then give them some time to reflect and write. And since that activates a different part of the brain, sometimes we, get to something writing that we might not through talking. Um,
Yeah.
it can be a magical process.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like so interesting and so fascinating. And
Yeah.
I am a very like the creative side of my brain is not very strong and big. The very logical side is great. I've always
Uh-huh.
been intimidated by art therapy just because like I can draw a stick figure and that's about it. um
That's okay.
so for those of us who like might not feel like our creative bones are quite as strong, or maybe like creativity just doesn't come naturally to us, where we color in the lines, adult coloring books all the
Mhm.
way.
Oh
Um,
yeah, those are great. Yeah.
but for those of us like where creativity is just not our strength, like how like can poetry therapy still be a thing? Like how does that work?
I think definitely. And I always tell people to, if you really don't want to write, because some people just really don't, right? Then okay, then maybe we just read through the poem and like discuss. Or maybe it's something that if you don't like to write, or maybe sometimes people don't even like to read, then it's more of okay, is there a way for you to tell your story, right? Like kind of you might have heard of narrative therapy before, where,
Yeah.
somebody tells the story of a traumatic event that happened with them, right? So sometimes it's that, sometimes that's just talking too,
Mhm.
that narrative therapy. And I always tell people too, like, it doesn't matter if creativity doesn't come easily to you. Like if you're wanting to try writing or even drawing in a session, this is just for you. This is not, you're not getting a grade on this. You don't have to pay attention to grammar, right? This is more about the process, not the final product. And so I think that, and then of course, if somebody doesn't want to do poetry therapy, I'm not going to be forcing anybody either, right? Because some people just prefer to talk, and that's a good too.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a good question because I truly believe everyone has creativity within them. Sometimes it's just, how do I find this? How do I pull this
Yeah.
out?
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I like that there could be some variety in both the like reading poetry and kind of just talking
Mhm.
about maybe some of like the feelings or experiences that brings up, or writing, or maybe both. And so it seems like it
Mhm.
does kind of maybe offer, yeah, just some different avenues for people to approach it. Very
Yeah, or even sometimes people really like quotes. I'm a huge quote person and I just love inspirational quotes. So even that could technically be considered poetry therapy too. It doesn't have to be poetry. It's kind of like an umbrella term for, you know, bibliotherapy, writing, and other stuff. So yeah.
interesting.
Uh-huh.
Interesting. How did you come across this? Like how, because it is kind of that like you said, like that hidden gem,
Right.
like in the art therapy world. Like how did you find poetry therapy?
So my mom actually found an article in the newspaper about it in the Chicago Tribune, and she showed it to me, and that was when I was in graduate school for social work. And I had never heard of it, and I was just thought I'm doing this. I love poetry. And so there's this association called National Association for Poetry Therapy. So it talked about that. And so then I went on their website and just looked at everything you have to do and got in touch with some people through there.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Well, so it sounds like poetry's kind of always been a little bit of a part of you.
Oh, definitely. For
Yes.
sure.
Yeah. Well, it's really cool to hear about how you're able to bring like something that like you're passionate about, something that like really like fills you up as a person, like into your practice and the services that you can provide to people that you're helping. So I like that
Absolutely.
integration. Very cool.
Thank you. Me too.
Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about a skill, a strategy. Maybe it's poetry, maybe it's something else, but something that you use in your own life that you also kind
Mhm.
of teach the clients that you're working with.
Definitely. And so I think the thing that I use the most is mindfulness, whether that's yoga or meditation or just like taking a mindful walk and paying attention. And I think a lot of people, when they think of mindfulness, they think of meditation, and that's another umbrella term, as you know, right? For being non-judgmental, paying attention in the present moment. And so this has really helped me, especially in times of feeling anxious or needing to ground myself. Um, so I do a meditation every night before going to sleep. And then also when I wake up, I usually do a 5 to 10 minute meditation as well. And I really like guided meditation. So I'm going to recommend this app called Insight Timer. It's a free app. There's no commercials and there's thousands of guided meditations out there. And for me personally, it's easier to focus on someone's voice saying, okay, and now focus on your breath or imagine, that you're in a peaceful place or however. It's a little bit easier to focus than sitting in complete silence. And that's great too. That has its place. Um, but I think that is usually what helps me a lot. And then I also had before the pandemic had been doing meditation at a Buddhist temple, and that helped me a lot too. So I would go usually once a week, and it would be like 2 half-hour meditations that they would do. And this really helped ground me as well. So
Yeah.
a lot of times I will either do a meditation in session with a client or recommend this app to them. And a lot of times people are thinking, oh my gosh, meditation seems so hard. Like I cannot clear my mind. And then I always like enjoy telling people like you don't have to clear your mind. That's not the goal because everyone's brain is like the monkey brain that just goes from thought to thought.
Yep.
so,
Yeah.
so I always like telling people it's okay. Like, and there's one meditation I especially liked that I found that said, even if your brain gets distracted a thousand times, that's okay. And I feel like that is helpful and can give people a good starting point because it can be intimidating, especially if you think, oh my gosh, I have to think nothing. No, it's not how it is. But
Yeah. I had someone tell me, or maybe I read it somewhere once with mindfulness, like it's not trying to get to like an empty mind. You're not trying to like empty your mind of thoughts.
right,
It's that we're just trying to like experience the mind as it comes and it goes and not grab on or kind of like get stuck on like a thought or
exactly.
experience. So yeah. And I'll put the information, you said it's the Insight Timer app. I'll put the information in the video description if people want to find it. But
Oh, great.
I like that it gives you kind of some of those prompts because I'm thinking about,
Uh-huh.
I'm thinking about how, yes, there are some times where I am in the zone and I can sit in silence and do the thing for a few minutes or maybe, a half hour. But
Uh-huh.
I'm also thinking about how most of the time I've got a lot on my mind. There's a lot of
Oh,
stuff
yeah,
on my to-do list or thinking about like, oh man, I really should be doing this instead. And so
for
I
sure.
like the prompts, right? Because they do kind of give you that permission to kind of stay focused. And if and when your mind starts to wander, because we have human brains that are going to wander, uh,
Right.
the prompts
Exactly.
kind of give you that invitation to come back. And yeah, even if your mind wanders 100 times, you can choose to come back 100 times and you're still doing it right.
Exactly. Exactly. And then I think another important piece to that is to try to be non-judgmental with yourself because sometimes we all get caught up in that, right? Oh, geez, why am I not focusing? Like focus and
Yeah.
or is even something maybe harsher to yourself. So I think that's another important piece is okay, oh, mind wanders, bring it back and try
Yeah.
to be neutral about it.
Yeah. Yeah. So tell me about like when you are going through a time, maybe it's like a day or a week that like oof, it's one of those where it is just one thing after another. There's a lot of like super stressful things going on. Maybe you're
Mm.
even kind of feeling that like urgency of like getting some of those things done on your to-do list. How do you still incorporate like this mindfulness in there? Because I feel like it's something that so easily could get put on the back burner.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Something that has been helpful is actually putting it on my to-do list. Like writing down, right, whether it's meditation or mindfulness, and then crossing that off. And then just, I think, forming that initial habit as well. So it took me 2 years of going to that Buddhist temple on Sundays before I actually got into my own practice at home and before I started that habit. So it can be, right, like you said, it can be challenging, especially when you have those thoughts like, oh, geez, I've got my to-do list, right?
Yeah.
So I think tried to start really small, and I think I started with 5 minutes a day. And then I was able to gradually, once I was able to do 5 minutes consistently, then I gradually built up to like 10 minutes in the morning and 10 minutes before bed.
Mm,
Um, but that's a good question because things always do come up. And I
yeah.
also find like that there are some days when I don't get to it, especially if I'm on vacation, right? And it's just
Yeah.
like out of my routine and oh, wake up and okay, we're gonna go do this, which is great too. So,
Yeah. And so even giving yourself that flexibility where if it
right.
doesn't happen that day for some reason, having that non-judgmentalness with yourself of like, okay, it doesn't mean the whole thing is a wash and I have to start all over again. I can pick it
Exactly.
back up. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you find, because I'm thinking back to, you shared that sometimes it's meditation, sometimes it's a different mindfulness practice, sometimes it's a mindful walk. So like
Uh-huh.
during those like more stressful days, like are there are there maybe like particular mindfulness exercises or practices that you choose that for you feel like they work better on those days than maybe other ones?
Oh yeah, that's a good question. I think a lot of times if I'm feeling it, if I'm feeling more like anxious in my body, then doing like a little bit of yoga
Mm.
or progressive muscle relaxation. That was what I did last night. I was kind of just lying awake in bed and feeling like some tension. So
Mhm.
then I listened to this progressive muscle relaxation, and they have you like tense a muscle and then relax it and breathe out. And that worked really well for me.
Yeah, yeah. I like that you're kind of thinking about like, okay, am I needing this mindfulness practice to be like a mind experience, or am I needing to like incorporate my body into it in some way to kind of like also be
Mhm.
utilizing more of your brain, right?
Right, right.
Yeah. Yeah. Very, very cool. If somebody wanted to learn more about like mindfulness, I know Insight Timer, it sounds like it's a good one. What are some
Definitely.
ways that people can learn about mindfulness or kind of get introduced to it?
That's a good point too. Um, I love this website called therapistaid.com. You probably know about it. And even if you're not a therapist, you can go on there and just type in mindfulness. And then there's a couple of like just brief overview info sheets that describe it and kind of different ways to practice it.
Yeah.
And then YouTube also has a lot of good mindfulness stuff on there. So that's a good resource. And then maybe even, right, if someone is really interested, looking for meditation centers or in their area or Buddhist temple in their area, if that's something that somebody is into too, that can be a really nice way as well.
Yeah, yeah. And I'll link a couple of those mindfulness worksheets from the therapist aid site below too, so people can
Oh,
quickly access those.
excellent.
So yeah. So Bri, how do people get in touch with you if they want to learn more about mindfulness or are interested in poetry therapy?
Yeah, definitely. So I have my website, therapywithbree.org, and then my email address is therapywithbreellc@gmail.com.
Excellent. And that info will be below as well. Thank you so
Great.
much for coming and talking about mindfulness with us today.
Thank
It's such a
you for
powerful
having me.
tool.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This was wonderful.